Very welcome to Power Us live panel. Today we want to share some topics with you. And Power Us network is a network that has existed for approximately 10 years. And it consists of service users, academics, and practitioners in partnership who develop practice together, and we share experiences with each other.
Welcome, everybody. The aim of our panel this morning is to explore how liberatory approaches can promote dialogue and mend gaps between all involved in social work. We're keen to gather an international picture of these issues, so we're hoping to use this time that we've got this morning to present to you some of our own examples from the different parts of Europe that we're in, and we're going to introduce ourselves shortly. But we'd also really like to invite you to use the chat box and share some of your examples with us. And there's an opportunity for you to put your questions to us throughout as we're speaking. I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists, ask the panelists to introduce themselves to you. And then the way that we're going to work is that we will, in turn, share some of our examples and experiences. And then we'll take your questions and some of your examples and spend whatever time we have after that to discuss these. So we're really hoping that you will interact with us in this way, because this is a really great opportunity for Power Us to think about how we can mend some more gaps. So I'm going to start by briefly introducing myself. I'm Helen Casey, and I'm a social work lecturer at the Open University, which is an online international university that might be familiar to some of you. I'm saying international with international students, like many universities, and I'm also a coordinator for Power Us. I'm going to ask Susan to introduce herself next.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Susan Levy. I'm a senior lecturer in social work at the University of Dundee in Scotland. And looking forward to this panel session with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Eleanor, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, my name is Eleanor Dowson, and I'm also from Scotland. And for the sake of clarity, could I just point out that health, social care, and social work is devolved to the Scottish Government, because this is something I always find causes confusion. I'm very delighted to be here sharing this opportunity with you, and very grateful to have it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. Simona.
Yes, hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting us here. My name is Simona Carveniaris. I'm a lecturer and researcher at the University of Applied Sciences Utrecht in the Netherlands. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Leiden Medical University. I'm researching the lived experiences of professionals in mental health care.
Thank you. Jenny.
Jenny's not here.
Jenny's not here, and I also have apologies from Vinny. So if you've looked at who our live panelists are this morning, unfortunately we have two people who couldn't make it. So I'm going to go next to Peter. Peter, do you want to briefly say hi? I don't know if you've got your mic muted, perhaps.
While we wait for Peter, I can introduce myself, Helen. My name is Cecilia Höhle, and I work in Lund, at Lund University. I'm one of the international coordinators of Power Us. Peter? I think Peter has some technical problems. Peter, can you unmute yourself?
I have a technical problem that I think I've been getting to lots of sound.
While we wait for Peter, I can introduce myself, Helen. My name
is...
No,
Peter's with us now, Cecilia.
At Lund University. I'm one of the international coordinators of PowerUs. Peter.
Thanks.
I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. Hello, it's Peter
I
here.
think Peter has some technical problems. Peter, can you unmute yourself?
Problem that I think I've been getting to lots of
While we
sound.
wait for Peter, I can introduce.
I
think there's a technical
No,
problem. My
Peter's
voice
with
is
us now,
really
Cecilia.
good at Lund University. I'm one of the international coordinators of PowerUs. Sorry, I'm not saying it's just going on repeat.
Sorry about the technical difficulties. Hello, it's Peter
I
here.
think Peter has some technical problems. Peter, can you unmute yourself?
Problem that I think I've been getting to lots of sound.
While we wait for Peter, I can introduce. I think there's a technical. Okay. Have we resolved the problems? We apologize for this. We don't know what happened.
Looks like Peter's left us. Maybe
The recordings went on repeat. I suggest we continue.
Yeah. And hopefully Peter will be able to rejoin us. And hopefully you've all had the chance to watch Peter's keynote prior to our panel starting. I know that it was a very early start for some of us, but that recording is available throughout the conference. So, you know, we would really encourage you to watch that, because Peter has highlighted some, you know, very pertinent issues to our topic this morning about some of the, you know, the reasons really why we might feel restrained in being able to promote our aims for involving people with lived experience and promoting experiential knowledge in the development and the delivery of social work education, as well as social work practice. So do get back to that keynote if you haven't had chance to see that already. So we're going to start by sharing some of our examples from some of our countries, and as invited, encourage you to share some of yours and put some questions to us. So I'm going to invite Susan first to tell us a little bit about the situation in Scotland. Susan and Eleanor.
So good morning, everyone, again, and hopefully we can have Peter rejoining us soon. So wherever you are on this earth that we all call home, welcome to this panel session. And thanks to Cecilia and Helen for opening this session, and thanks very much to the organisers of this unique and very important global summit. So I'm going to open and use my time, rather than focus on Scotland, I'm going to let Eleanor talk more about the situation in Scotland. I'm going to encourage you to think about a broader global perspective around regulation, social work, and user involvement. Now, members of the PowerUs network, as reflected in the panel that we have with us today, are largely European and work with and or have experience of the impact of extensive regulation and risk-averse practices on everyday lives. As such, we present contextualized understandings of the connections and disconnections between governance and the inclusion of diverse voices and policy and practice. And a key driver of this panel session is located in the overregulation that is so prevalent in the West, and the impact of this on social work and on people's lives. So whilst the West grapples with achieving meaningful practice in the context of increasing regulation, if we look to the global South, the connections and disconnections between regulation, social work, and user involvement are very different. And a fundamental challenge for social work across much of the global South is the absence of regulation and frameworks to guide social work practice. Yet many of the strengths of social work in Africa, for example, can be found in relational and community-based practices, things that are less visible in the West. And whilst the reasons for this are multi-layered, and certainly there's a cultural dimension to this diversity in practices, the absence of governance and regulation cannot be overlooked as one factor that contributes to social workers having greater agency in much of the global South to work at a more relational level with people. So how do we achieve that balance between regulation and meaningful user involvement. And this is something that I want you to hold on to as each of us move through and speak in this panel session. And as you listen to each of the following speakers, reflect on this question within the context of your own country. And as Helen has pointed out, please share the chat, share your experiences, your thoughts, so that we can learn from each other and collaboratively work towards a rebalancing of power in policy-making structures, ensuring that marginalized voices are heard and acted upon within social work practice, and that we value different knowledges and their contribution in co-creative, inclusive, and more sustainable societies with or without regulation. So hopefully that sets a scene for us for the next sort of for our panel, for us to think globally, but also recognize the local context in which everybody else is going to be talking to. So we each have a few minutes to talk. So that's my contribution for now. And I'm going to pass over to Eleanor, who's going to talk about her experiences from a Scottish perspective. Thank you, Eleanor.
So I've been a family carer for over 25 years with a particular interest in mental health and living life well, and a charity director both nationally and locally. As a result, I'm passionate about my care, as a result of my caring experience, both good and bad, that service users and carers, or experts by experience, if you prefer, are able to participate meaningfully by having the opportunity to have their voices heard and change made if they wish to attitude, policy and practice. From this, I feel that without wishing to deviate from Susan's question, where does the balance lie between participation and regulation, it is important to think of any barriers such as service users and carers living in small towns and villages, and mechanisms which could support them, for instance, pop-up cafes or technical help. It's very important to think of how to reach marginalised groups and keep addressing this problem. Charities are very well supported in Scotland, particularly those set up to help people with a health condition or a local or natural need. They're well placed to support service users and carers to have their voices heard. However, the type of short-term funding they receive from which they have to constantly tender is time-consuming, soul-destroying, and the pressures of having to be seen to be accountable at all times, and the crippling amount of policies and procedures with which they have to put in place, leave workers with burnout and little opportunity for future plans or job protection for staff. I'm emphasising this because to me, this is one of the gaps in what is happening in Scotland as far as service users and carers finding their voice. These sudden cuts to services can leave service users distressed, hurt, confused, and often lead to a loss of service altogether. This leaves workers faced often with local councils who wish for them to focus on services at a loss as to how to support service users and carers in Scotland at universities or colleges or places where they might wish to have their voice heard. I would be very interested to know how other people are managing this problem in other countries, I know in Scotland it's particularly important to us to have our voices heard, and I think we might have been better at doing it in the past. But the many challenges that have faced us in the last few years seems to have eroded this ability. Thank you for listening to this, and I'm very, very keen to have responses.
Thank you, Eleanor. So the word goes now to Simona in the Netherlands.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I cannot share. I had one sheet, but that's okay. Yeah, so I am talking from the perspective of my research, which is currently conducted in 3 mental health organizations in the Netherlands. And in the final stage of this project, we're working together with both psychiatrists and directors. And we previously definitely also involved social workers who had a very good quality of relating to all these specific stakeholders, including, of course, service users. What we're trying to do is implementing experiential knowledge from inside out. So from inside a system that has a tradition of strict hierarchy and not specifically a culture that is based on values. So experiential knowledge in such system can be, and I think actually should be, disrupting and should disrupt the complete system. My idea about this is to start, of course, bottom up and top down with a mission and vision, and acknowledge that experiential knowledge is an equal source of knowledge that should be visible throughout the entire organization and should be available for every service user. Also, identify the value of lived experience practitioners in the teams. Assess the readiness of teams and the organization for the lived experience practitioner perspective and stimulate openness in this regard, and invest in experiential knowledge, facilitate this discretionary space of professionals, facilitate peer support and recovery-oriented and trauma-sensitive environments in and outside the organization, and stimulate all mental health professionals to be more open about their lived experiences, because many of them have lived experiences and would like to use them, but are not trained in using them appropriately. So there needs to be a dialogue between professionals and service users, and specifically we invested in the lead professionals. Educate and invest in lived experience practitioners on all levels of the organization: policy, human resources, clinical practice, outpatient services. Place lived experience practitioners on the board of directors and on the supervisory board. And of course, this all is not an easy task in a field of work in which the professional is supposed to use standardized protocols and is part of a rather technocratic environment.
Thank you, Simona. Very interesting. And the word goes now to Helen, who is active in the UK.
Okay, thank you. I mentioned at the beginning that Binny Arya, who is a project director working with the asylum seeker and refugee community in the northeast of England, was going to co-present with me this morning, and he's not available. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the work that we've done and give 2 examples that demonstrate, what people power can actually achieve, which is really why we're trying to highlight this topic of how we can promote more participatory ways of undertaking governance and regulation. So Binny and I co-facilitated alongside members of the asylum seeking community Amend the Gap project to address some of the many barriers that people who feel particularly marginalised in our society by virtue of being an asylum seeker and not having recourse to public funds in the case of many adults. That does differ for some of the unaccompanied young people that we worked alongside. But a lot of the barriers that people encounter are shared. And with our projects, we had the opportunity to invite people into the dialogue, which was the basis of our projects, about the gaps that we wanted to mend. We had the opportunity to invite people who could be instrumental and work with us, work in partnership with us, to help mend some of those gaps. So this is by way of sharing an example of how taking a gap mending approach can be effective in promoting dialogue and building relationships in the community. So, for example, in our project working with unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, we co-produced a very practical resource that came directly from their experience of arriving in the UK and being met by social workers and not having the response and what they really needed. And so together we were able to co-produce guidance. It's available. We are currently updating the Power of Us website, so the guidance will be available on the website soon, about how social workers can best support young people on arrival. So that was a good example of how that directly came from people's lived experiences of being here. What we found in some other aspects of regulation and governance is we have a measure called Ofsted in the UK, which is a quality assurance regulation system that governs the way social services actually, the quality that they operate and are delivered, and they're scored. I'd be really interested to hear if other countries have similar systems where they're actually, regularly assessed and scored. And what this governance body actually does is, if it, which it often does, assesses a local authority, a social services department, if it assesses it at quite a low level and says it needs improvement and it's not, operating to the quality and the standard that it would expect, then it usually recommends the need for staff to be trained. And it's quite common, we found in the Northeast, for the feedback in communities where there are quite a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, for the feedback from Ofsted to be that staff need much more cultural awareness training, better understanding of supporting people's diverse cultural needs. And so the gap mending approach that we've had the opportunity to implement, which was also we've linked it to research, and we've got a very strong evidence base of the impact and the effectiveness of that approach, has demonstrated how it's possible to change things, to change outcomes, and to improve services. But what we often come up against in this feedback and these findings is recommendations for staff to have increased training, which can sometimes be a one-off training session, or at worst, some kind of online training package that's put on where people would actually sit at their computers and sign off some training on cultural awareness. And we feel very passionately that this is a missed opportunity for real interaction, for real relationships to be built with people in the community who those services are for, who, like the young people that have co-produced the leaflet, are best placed to work alongside, in partnership with people, and guide on what actually people need. That leaflet that young people in Middlesbrough co-produced has been disseminated widely in the region in social services departments, so we can share these examples of the practices that we come out with. So yeah, I've got very little time this morning, so I'm not going to carry on, but I hope that's conveyed a real strength of feeling of how, of the one way that it can be when governance recommends that there needs to be improvements and staff development, but how co-production, participatory, in our case, mend the gap approaches can really, really get to grips with that issue and fundamentally change things. Thank you for listening. I'm going to hand over to back over to Cecilia and Jenny to hear about your examples in Sweden.
Yes, thank you, Helen. Unfortunately, Jenny couldn't make it today, but I will talk a little bit about the situation in Sweden. You know, many of the problems that are discussed in Sweden today are due to lack of integration. People, we have had a lot of immigrants from 2015 and on. We received many asylum seekers, but the social work and the system has not been able to meet those people's needs of integration. And immigrants are not the only people who have a lack of integration in society. It can also be people with the mental health background, or people who have a background in a criminal lifestyle, people with a background with drug addicts who don't get opportunities to get another role in their life, so to speak. So working in inclusive ways can fill a very important role for people when they leave their problems behind. And if we don't work in more inclusive ways, I feel that it's a big unused capital that is not used within our education, within social work practice. And although research shows that relationship-oriented, that relationships are more important, is a more effective factor than different technologies within social work practice, our organizations are not built to, or are not arranged so that relationships are promoted. And this goes for the academia, but it also goes for instance, the social services. And there is a big debate in Sweden right now. We had riots around Easter this year where 200 policemen were hurt, really, by people throwing stones. And this is an expression of this lack of integration that we have. So we have election coming up, and this is one of the questions that will be on the agenda. How do we prevent those parallel societies from growing in some of our suburbs? You know, within the Power Us network, we have been working with gap mending principles and strategies, and the word gap mending was developed early on in the Power Us history. And it actually only means the reflections about what causes gaps and what bridges gaps. And within the practice that I am active in at Lund University, some of you know that we have since 2005 courses where social work students study together with people from different service user organizations for 6 weeks full time. And we noticed within those courses that the most effective gap mending strategy was for people to share their narratives, not as representatives of a category. We realized there were really lots of prejudice that made people look at each other just from judging where they were from their organization, you know, and it prevented them from really seeing each other, really building on those relationships. And when people share their narratives in a more vulnerable way, like Simona shared earlier in this session, social workers are not blank sheets. You know, we go through life and we experience problems, and it takes a lot of guts from our social work students to also be vulnerable and share. But that is what we have noticed, build trust. So in order to work against the stigmas that many of the social work problems causes, we need to mend the gaps by being more vulnerable and open ourselves, promoting relationships in social work practice. And by that, we might be able to change our organizations so that they better fit the needs of society. And I will end this little presentation by mentioning a book by our professor from Lund, Sune Sunesson. He wrote a book in the 80s about the social service when social work was becoming a research topic in Sweden. And the title of the book was Change Everything. And unfortunately, his description about social services in Sweden is still adequate. It is not much has changed to the better. And I don't think it necessarily is lack of resource that we have the situation we have now. It's more that we don't acknowledge the principles of relationship-oriented social work. So a challenge, if we want to mend the gaps in society and within social work practice, is to start reflecting upon gap mending principles and start creating those networks and use the experiential knowledge. And that's my little presentation. Thank you. And I will now give the word to Peter.
And thank you very much for that, Cecilia. I hope everyone can hear me all right. It's been terrific listening to the different international contributions from PowerUs, because it seems to me they chime so closely, as I'll say, with the agenda of this fantastic conference about building an eco-social world. And I think it's such a good idea that we focused on regulation and governance, because we need to examine those words, because they are so antagonistic, both to the spirit of PowerUs, the aspirations of most social workers, and the aims of this event in relation to the environment, the future of the planet. Because the sad truth is that governance is a concept absolutely tied to new public management and neoliberal philosophy. And if there's one thing which is putting this planet at great risk, apart from armed conflict, it is neoliberal philosophy, preoccupied with narrow profit. And I think that what we need to do is not try and work out how we can talk about, and that's what people have been saying, I think, how we can work out for more user involvement and more inclusive involvement in governance, because the two are antagonistic. I believe there is an inherent gap we cannot mend between those neoliberal ideas and the aspirations for mending the gap, and for relational social work, and for diverse involvement, which people have been talking about and seeking to take forward. If we want to maintain what is supposedly the aspiration of governance, which is improving quality, enabling people's rights and needs to be met, because governance doesn't do that. It bureaucratizes it. It controls social workers. It actually increases the distrust and distance between service users, carers, and social workers. Although, as everyone's been saying, we have so much in common, and so many people seek to be social workers who are absolutely dedicated to meeting the rights and interests of diverse communities, including those of indigenous people, of not importing what have been damaging ideas from the global north and trying to set them down too in the global south. So I think there is a wonderful prospect in rethinking this idea of how do we ensure quality for human rights, quality for care and love between us all. And I think that the truth of the matter is what we've been talking about today. Put very shortly, it is actually mending the gap. It's recognizing the gap and mending it. And we do that together. We don't do that through bureaucratic systems. We will be wise to challenge and reject those bureaucratic systems. But if we want to have a future for our planet, we will have to go even further. And as part of that journey, which we're all taking in this fantastic conference, we will need to challenge that awful basis of philosophy of the ideology of neoliberalism, that it's each of us for ourselves, and it's for individual profit that we exist in this world. We are not mere consumers. We are citizens. We should be global citizens, and we should have a right and an opportunity to care for and look after each other with equality. And that's what Mending the Gap's about. And I'm so pleased we have this very timely event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I notice from the chat that many people have been asking how to access your keynote if they haven't had a chance to see it already. So I think somebody's helpfully suggested that the link for that is in the programme. So it'd be great if everyone knows that and gets the opportunity to see the keynote that you prepared. So now we have the time available to us to take forward some of the points that have been raised in the chat, and if there are any questions for the panel. So Susan, can I ask you to lead us on that?
Yes, so I've just thanks to everybody who's been using the chat. It's one of those things that over the last 2 years we've all become quite proficient at using online systems, and I for one, I think it's hugely valuable how we can interact online and use the chat function that we have on the devices. So let me just have a look. As Helen has said, there was a few questions around Peter's keynote, and then we're looking at not any specific questions, but we don't have any real examples yet in the chat from different countries around the world. So if anybody wants to include that, that'd be really helpful.
Susan, we have difficulty hearing you.
Oh, okay. Yes, I realized when I turn my head, I've got a screen here with a chat on, and when I turn my head, you lose my voice. So I'm not sure if somebody else wants to take over, because if I turn my head to look at the chat, I'm not sure if somebody else wants to take over. That might be easier than I appreciate that my microphone doesn't pick up if I turn my head.
You turn your head and I just repeat your question there.
Okay. Well, there's a question. The last two, there's something about risk aversion. Let me just look at those. So this is going to be quite challenging to read out a question whilst I've got my head turned. Does somebody else want to read the questions? I feel that I might lose connection with people if I'm trying to talk and you can't hear me. Does somebody else want to step in and do that instead? No, okay.
I don't see any questions, so I would love to.
I'm going to turn my head and have a look, and then because it's coming in now.
So while Susan is looking, I just want to say that what she asked for was to get some feedback from different countries on this topic that we have been discussing. What challenges are you struggling with, or what opportunities do you see in your countries?
Okay, so there's one of the key questions or issues that's emerging from the chat that's coming through is around risk-averse practices. So I'm not sure whether anybody wants to pick up on that and talk to that in relation to practices within your own countries or within your own experience, or from research that, or from Eleanor as a carer. What does that mean? How does it feel, and how can we handle it within the context that we're looking at? Of regulation, but also that relational social work values approach. Do one of you want to step in?
Can you repeat that, Susan, the question?
The topic around risk aversion. How are we addressing it? What does it mean? What does it look like? And what are the challenges in overcoming that when in the current context that we're talking about? Peter, do you want to say something? Yeah,
I'll say something, and I say this based on a very big United Kingdom study. It is just the United Kingdom, which a group of us as service users, carers and practitioners undertook, funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And we operated in a range of different localities, working with service users, carers and practitioners, and having a chance to do developmental work. And it was very clear that in many of the areas that we were working in and talking with people, that there was a culture of risk averseness, and it was what became really clear in this project was that there were two things that were possible. There was working to support positive risk, and being preoccupied with restricting the possibility of negative risk. And what happened was that it was the latter that was what agencies were requiring their workers, social workers and care workers to do, never putting the agency in a situation where something could go wrong, and then either a problem could emerge which would become a media difficulty, or a problem would emerge which could become a legal responsibility that could put them as an organization at risk. So they were always terrified that something could happen because someone was leading an ordinary life, as, for example, a disabled person, or as a mental health service user or a young person in care, which could put them at risk. The preoccupation was with the agency, not the service user. And service users gave the most awful examples of things they weren't allowed to do, right to the level of not being allowed to use the fridge if they had a motorized wheelchair and they went outside because they might contaminate the food, how the wheelchair's wheels were going to contaminate the food. And then having to, if they wanted to go out, for example, shopping, having to have a plan for doing it before they were allowed to, not allowed to live an ordinary life. And I think it's this issue, the way in which, and I do think, again, it's part of the modern kind of new public management thinking. You're not concerned with enabling people to live their fullest possible potential life, but you are worried about your situation as an organization, as an agency. And I think I may have referred to it in what I said on my own before, that someone in America, and it's been repeated here by a good piece of research in relation to social work, is this idea of the McDonaldization of social work. Donna Dustin here wrote about that in the UK. And what it means is that increasingly the idea is that the social worker is restricted to very simple and controlled tasks and constantly being watched and having a little discrimination or discretion allowed them, which is awful. And it gives them few chances to work in the kind of constructive, relational, and non-risk averse way that we all need to live a decent life. And I again do put it down to the kind of overarching philosophy that seeks to take over professions like social work, which we all have to challenge, and which it is so difficult for practitioners to challenge.
Thank you, Peter. We have some questions and comments here. Perhaps I read them all, and then any of you in the panel can respond to them. There's a question here: has there been connection to the movement for degrowth? And of course, degrowth has been an important term within the Agenda 2030 and so on. So I'll let any of you respond to that. There's another comment here from Tal Milroy. How do we make organizations take a stronger stand for clients and workers instead of playing it safe and trying to avoid litigation, even at the cost of client and workers' well-being? And then we have a greeting from Sarah Banks. She says, as Peter says, social work is stuck in neoliberal culture in many parts of the world, but less so in others. What examples are there of social workers expressing their vulnerabilities? And the final comment here is from Victor Pestoff. Yesterday's Buen Vivir workshop on co-production and cooperative health culture, utopia or best practice in a post-COVID era, discusses inclusive governance models for providing healthcare worldwide. That sounds really interesting. Any of you in the panel here wants to respond to these comments, please go ahead. Susan.
Can I come in? Yeah, can I come in? And I think that one of the things that we haven't touched on, and maybe it's really useful to consider, is the role of social work education in all of this. And I know that, Cecilia, you were talking about some of the work that you do in the gap mending modules at Lund University. And each of us at our universities will very much involved with integrating service users and carers into our teaching. And Eleanor here is very much involved in modules at the University of Dundee. So there is a question here, and one of the issues that our students come back to from being out in practice is the translation or the application of the thinking and the understanding of youth involvement and participation, the essence of the issues that we're talking about, the challenge which they face in applying these into practice. And so I'm not sure whether, Eleanor, you want to come in and talk about some of the things that you do with our students, but this seems to be a challenge that we're facing, and it's a workforce that is embedded within one way of working that is often in contradiction. So not only are we talking about the neoliberal framework that is influencing current practice, but also an inherent way of working that perhaps has been around for many, many years. And much of the workforce are reluctant or unable or unsure of how to shift their thinking and understanding around working. And this is, and we hope that one way to address this is by developing a new workforce that's moving out and is in a position that they understand what we're aiming to achieve much more clearly around participation and inclusion, and integrating use of voice and so on, but also willing to challenge practices that they encounter whilst in practice. So I think the role of education is one key way that we can start to shift thinking and hopefully change practices for the future.
Yeah, and what I would like to add is that, of course, it's very good. I think that social work is kind of ahead when you look at many professions, but we definitely also need to invest in the other professions that are around and that we're cooperating with, such as, in my case, psychiatrists. It's really changing also their vision on their view on profession. And as to say so, I think that they have received an internalized message that they should be invulnerable and that that their profession is associated with mastery, not only by themselves, but also their environment confirms that message over and over. So I definitely also believe that we need an antidote to this toxic way of working together. And just as an example, I believe that deep democracy is a good example in voicing minorities and diversifying and bridging all these different perspectives of stakeholders who are involved.
Yes, thank you, Simona. Helen will go next. I was just thinking, Simona, sorry, before you leave, Sarah also asked about what examples there are of social workers expressing their vulnerabilities. And I know that you in the Netherlands have some examples of educating professionals in using their experiential knowledge. Can you just shortly, before Helen comes on, say something about that?
Yes, so in the Netherlands, there is a tradition of social work schools who got together for, well, it has been over 10 years now, because they received the call from students that certain students would like to implement and use their lived experiences during the curriculum, but definitely also in their social work practice. So that was a prominent call for us to respond to, and it is quite different on different schools, of course. It's differently organized, but there is a tendency to involve this perspective and to really use experiential knowledge in the curriculum. It's actually also mentioned in the national curriculum of social workers.
Thank you, Simona. Helen.
I was also going to respond to Sarah's question, and hi, Sarah. because we were talking about the principles of the Mend the Gap approach as a participatory approach to improving, to changing outcomes and overcoming gaps and barriers that exist between us. And when I say us, I mean people at the receiving end of social work, social health, whatever the service support is, and those providing it. And so I think that one of the big principles, and it's one of the discussions that we seem to have a lot about, who are we talking about? I think it comes to terminology. When we're talking about people with lived experiences, we think, you know, it's very important to acknowledge that many of us have lived experiences. This is not about a division. It's about acknowledging that as social workers, as lecturers, as researchers, as anybody, as people in our shared communities and society, we each one of us have our own experiences of perhaps at times overcoming oppressive structures or receiving services, whatever that might be. So I think that that opportunity for social workers to express their vulnerabilities comes through taking participatory approaches to learning, to implementing services. And this is, I think, such a good question, because it is one of the key opportunities to change the way services and governance and regulation actually works, to recognise that social workers have their own vulnerabilities as well. And through participatory approaches, there's opportunities to share that. So Sarah asked if there was some examples. So I would just say, to build on what Simona said about Holland, and I know there is that very good research that's come from Holland as well, from Ali Weerman, who's in the Power Us network, about the way that they've run a course that's entirely based on how, in this case, it's mental health students, mental health practitioners learn by acknowledging their own lived experiences at the outset. And within Power Us, and I mentioned earlier, we're developing our website. We have so many examples of the different gap mending approaches, the different Mend the Gap projects, and they all take into account how people have shared their, in a wide range of contexts, vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I can add, our time is running out, but there are many ways to work with experiential knowledge within the education. We have in semester 4, for instance, an assignment where students are reading a self-biography that they choose on their own. And, you know, there are so many biographies of interesting lives that has bearing in social work practice. And then they write an essay reflecting upon their own experiences. And they share this with the group. And by that, they show vulnerability. And they do take a leap into the unknown, so to speak. They do have some fears, you know, what should I share? What should I not share? But mainly we see that many of them have undealt with traumas, actually, not all. And some of them feel, oh, perhaps my experiences are not as valuable because I had a happy childhood and so on. But, you know, anyways, it's important to reflect upon own experiences. And if we don't give the students that opportunity within our educations, we fail to equip them to have a relationship-based social work. So it's also landing in your own experiences. I think it's very important.
Could I come in here, Eleanor?
Yes, you can have the final word, Eleanor. You have 2 minutes, and we promise to stop in 2 minutes.
Okay, right. As part of what I've always done as a carer, I felt that I had to inspire social work staff, the psychiatrists, whoever was there, because at the care plan meeting, everyone would speak about how this was not possible or the person was not doing this. And then at the end, they would ask me, and I would say, well, actually, this is what they're doing. And there'd be a look of complete amazement, and I think sometimes disbelief. And a lot of trying to find out if this was true, which they always found out it was true. And that's what I've done with through the Scottish Recovery Network, where we've always thought of being the most important thing was to be risk aware, not risk averse. And I've also done it with the social work students at Dundee, and also the students I'm involved with at the trainees in clinical psychology at Glasgow University. I think it's very, very important to let people see how things affect you as a carer, feel your emotions, and through that, I found that the students will be very happy building on that trust to share their emotions too. And I think that whole way we are working at Dundee is extremely positive and covers so many of the things that we've spoken about today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And that's such a great note for us to end on. Thanks everybody for your comments in the chat. There's been some really inspirational comments and conversations coming through that, which we'll be able to, all the panel here will be able to have full sight of, and that's really great that everybody's interacted in that way. Thanks to all the panelists. It's been a really, really interesting and enjoyable session, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye from Power Us.